Good, how are you?
I am great. I'm super excited for everything we're going to talk about. I think it'll be great. Lots of good
Oh yeah.
topics.
Oh yeah, this is going to be a good one. And we've always been so into the gut microbiome. So when there was that Black Friday sale, we're like, let's try it. And we did, and we got so much information back. And now we're taking action in changing what we're eating because we're going to do another test in May to see how the changes work.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect.
so yeah. So tell my followers a little bit about who you are.
Sure. So Kimberly Griffith, my background is in functional medicine and clinical nutrition. I am someone that always asks the why, like like a little kid. And within the nutrition world, all the research I kept on going back to was on the microbiome, right? It just fed into why do we eat healthy? Why do we have vitamin production? Why do we have neurotransmitters? Why do some people get diseases? You know, all these answers to why, you know, why does the SAD diet, the Western diet not work, right? So that led me down the microbiome. I did about 6 years of studying within the microbiome, and I'm just fascinated with it. I love the company OMBRE. I feel like they do a great job at giving us the resources. We've taken all the research so you don't have to do it. You test, and then we tell you, you know, how to eat, what you may need to modulate your biome, such as probiotics or prebiotics. And I think that all contributes to this preventative medicine we're all looking for, right?
That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, I'm so grateful to have this chat with you. I've got a whole wide list of questions, and I'm sure we can do a Q&A at the end if people stick around and they have some questions. But to start off with, let's chat about the gut microbiome itself. So what is the gut microbiome exactly?
Right. So I'm going to clarify some terms first. So the microbiota is the microorganisms that live on us, in us, directly tied to health. The microbiome is the genome of those microorganisms, mostly bacteria. So we have different microbiomes. We have the oral microbiome, the skin microbiome, females have the vaginal microbiome, and then we have the gut microbiome. That's our biggest biome. To give some stats, it's about 3 to 4 pounds, like our brain, roughly the same size. On a cellular level, we used to think we were 10 to 1 microbial to human cells. Now it's about 1 to 1 based on the recent literature. But genes, they far outnumber us. Like we have 20,000 genes, they have 20 million plus genes. So it's our microbial DNA and our human DNA that kind of makes us who we are and determines our status of health or disease. So it's very influential on all areas of our life.
It's incredible. Like when I got my microbiome test back, you guys found 55,000 something different bacteria in my, I was like, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah, and that changes, you know, between the samples, you know, it's very acute at what we look at, so.
Yeah, for sure. I know, and it's going to change depending on what you eat and all kinds of other factors. Like even, I've heard even sleep can affect it.
Oh, absolutely. Sleep is interesting because it's kind of the chicken or egg thing. Like a dysbiotic microbiome, and dysbiosis means like an imbalance, maybe low beneficial bacteria, high inflammatory bacteria can inhibit sleep. So maybe you don't you wake up more often, or you don't go into a deep sleep. But also if whatever's going on in your life and you don't sleep very well, then that can create dysbiosis within the gut. And so then you can feed more of those bacteria that have metabolites that contribute to fatigue. So it's both with sleep. If you're suffering from sleep imbalances, it's kind of two things. Make sure your microbiome's in a good state, but also protect that sleep time, right? It's not always that easy if you have babies or something, but do your best to have good sleep so you're kind of nourishing the microbiome as well.
Yeah, that is so important. So why is a gut microbiome test so important these days?
Yeah, so probably to me, it's because, you know, the microbiome is tied to every imbalance there is. I mean, just a simple PubMed search from asthma to allergies to obesity to IBD, I mean, to COVID. The microbiome affects all areas. To bring it back, you know, a little more focused, you know, we say in the nutrition world, you are what you eat. But that's not necessarily true. You are what you absorb. And if you have a dysbiotic gut microbiome, if you have inflammation within the gut, maybe poor gut lining, high pathogen load, then all those awesome foods you're eating, you may not be reaping all the benefits from them. So you may not get the vitamin production or the neurotransmitter production that helps your mood if you don't have a good balance of gut. But, you know, from a higher level, you know, I said that the gut's associated with every disease. Have you heard of a field called epigenetics? Yeah, so it's the idea that we're not bound by our genes. We used to kind of think like if we had a gene for something, okay, it was fatal, like that was what determined it. You know, genes are like the bullet in the gun. It doesn't do anything just sitting there, right? It can make you feel uncomfortable, and some people do when they know their genetic predispositions, it makes them feel uncomfortable. But you're not bound by it. You know, within epigenetics, they prove that the microbiome can affect disease manifestation through inflammation, or it can suppress those genes. Your environment, your toxins exposure, the foods you eat, like all of those outside factors determine if the gene manifests and creates a disease. So yeah, there's plenty of reasons I could go on, but from a nutritional aspect and just preventative medicine, we're in a great time where we can kind of take our own health on ourselves. You know, we don't have to wait for our yearly checkups, which are super important, but we can also monitor it on our own and kind of course correct as we see trends going off, right? So.
That's so awesome. I know, I was like so excited when the microbiome tests became more widely available. Because like for a long time, it wasn't even a thing. People didn't even think that there was any connection at all. So I'm so glad that it's readily available. Like anyone can take it. And that was my next question. Who can benefit? I think anyone can benefit from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely everyone can benefit. You know, years ago, we started this idea of like getting regular checks with our physician, the CBC, so we can monitor our triglycerides and cholesterol. And before symptoms happen, before disease starts, we can course correct, right? Change our diets, change those lifestyle modulators. But now we have this, that we can take it on ourselves and take a hold of our health, empower ourselves so we can monitor these trends in your microbiome too. We know it's tied to all these diseases and health. So easily available, you can monitor yourself and then course correct a little bit if you need to, right? Change the recommended foods if you need to, use probiotics or prebiotics. You know, I'm all about empowering all of us to take a hold of our health ourselves. And we're in such a cool age right now where we can do that.
Yeah, I love that. I know when I got my test back with the results, there was the top 5 foods that I was suggested to eat are foods that I don't normally eat. And I eat a wide range. Like my husband and I tested one time, we eat like 80 different plant foods a week. So we're already eating, already eating like a crazy amount of different variety, but I wasn't eating sunchokes, which was like one of my top ones, fennel, endive, and like fennel seeds, and some of those things I just rarely ate. So now they're a regular part of my diet, but I would not have even thought to add them more regularly to my diet had I not done the test.
Yeah, so. And that's great. I mean, when you bring up the foods are weighted. So, you know, your top 5 foods, like you said, the sunchoke artichoke, those are weighted based on the research. So we give you a whole bunch of foods, but the top 5 in every category show the strongest correlation to the research to increasing maybe your deficient bacteria. But I know just looking at your plates, I look at your plates and I'm like, oh, that's easily 15 different plant-based foods. And we want to aim for like 30 to 40 at least a week, which a lot of people don't do, but easily you could do it if we follow some of your recipes. So
definitely, definitely add more variety. I'm all about the variety. Like as much as you can possibly get in is beneficial because it's going to help to grow. So if someone's going to take the test, when's like the best time to take a test? Like morning or night or certain times in their life? When's a good time to take the test? The first one, I guess.
Yeah, so I don't know that the research indicates a certain time of day. I personally would recommend just in a morning, because some people don't have more than one stool. So in the morning, I would say I would recommend taking it. I wouldn't recommend taking it if you're on an antibiotic. We want to wait till after the antibiotic, maybe 5 to 7 days, and then take it. That way the biome has had time to adjust from the antibiotic and move back into what we call your microbial fingerprint, what's normal for you. Some people take it before they do changes in their diet. If they want to just completely change their diet, but they want to see where they are and see where they can go, that's a good time to take it before. We all respond well to positive feedback. So I think it helps adhere to a program or adhere to those healthy changes in your diet if you see those positive results along the way.
Mm-hmm. I agree too. We have a question in the chat. Is it a poop test? Yes, it is a poop test. So how does one do this kind of a test?
Yeah, so it's really easy. You're going to order a microbiome test. It will come straight to you. You can order it off of our website. We have a swab, and then we have a proprietary buffer. So you take a sample off your stool, off your toilet paper. It doesn't have to be a lot, it's just a little bit. You're going to mix it in the buffer, shake the buffer. It's going to keep the bacteria from growing. That way, when it's received at the lab, it's the most accurate representation of your biome at that moment from your stool sample. You don't have to mess with the poop at all, but that's why I say everybody can benefit because everybody poops, right? It's that great book, Everybody Poops. So we can all do it.
Nice. Yeah, and it really is easy. I mean, when I did it, it's like a little rice-sized sample, and like she said, mix it in the little thing, and then just drop it back in the mail. There are certain countries can't get the OMBRE LAB test. Do you have any suggestions? Because I've had a lot of people reach out from like the UK, from Canada, from Australia. Do you have any suggestions for those people who might not be able to get the OMBRE LAB one? Because I know right now they're only doing US.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are other tests they can look at other countries. It really depends what country they are in. I would say when you go to look to order a test, if it's not within the US and we can't ship you, make sure first it's direct to consumer. A lot of microbiome tests have to go through a provider, and they're a little bit more complicated to read. I would say first, make sure it's direct to consumer and make sure you're getting the raw data. You're getting exactly what your abundances are, not just a score, because it's important for your tracking purposes to know how that bacteria is shifting. Scores are good. We all love scores. We love high scores, but it really is something you want to track along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, direct to customer is definitely easier because you just do it and drop it in the mail. Mm-hmm. So it's really easy. Someone's asking, the sample doesn't expire during transit?
No, it does not. Yeah, our buffer has been tested that it lyses the cells and it keeps them from growing. So yes, it does not expire during transit.
Nice. Awesome.
So it used to be microbiome tests were cultured, and then that was a problem because the bacteria, could grow along the way. So we've advanced, and I can't even imagine where we're going to be 20 years from now. There's talk that there will be toilets that monitor your microbiome and give you readouts, and then you adjust your next, food based on, if you were exposed to a pathogen. So really cool stuff happening in the microbiome world.
That is way cool. I know my husband's mentioned that before. He's like, I'd love to have a toilet that just tells you everything about your poo.
Yes.
That would be so
weird,
cool.
But yeah.
Yeah. So how is a microbiome test different from an allergy test? Because when I shared with my followers that I was changing some of the things in my diet, they were asking is it an allergy test? But it's not. Can you explain a little more about that?
Yeah, so for an allergy test, you're looking at antibodies. So it's more of an immune response. So we're not going to tell you what you're allergic to. You know, over 80% of your immune system is housed in your gut. So the microbiome directly affects allergies, but it is not an allergy test. You would need a serum test for that.
Cool. Perfect. Okay, so the next question I have is, this one I really want to know. What is the average gut score that comes into your lab? What's the highest score you've ever seen, and what's the lowest score you've ever seen?
Oh, okay. So I think the highest score I've ever seen is in the high 90s, maybe a 97. Lowest score was in the 30s, maybe a little lower.
Yeah, I have heard the 30s. I had a couple people message and say, I had that and it was in the 30s. So what causes a low gut score? Like, what can people do if they do have, obviously they're going to listen to some of the advice in their readout, but what would you say causes a lower gut score?
So for the score, we look at a few things. We look at the balance of the bacteria, the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, and what's considered, you know, healthy averages. And diversity accounts for a third of that score. Diversity is highly tied to health based on the research. And diversity is the different species. You want a lot of different species because all these bacteria have different jobs. You know, I've heard them talk, you know, the bacteria is like, could be like different breeds of dogs, right? You could have a Chihuahua or a Pit Bull. They're all good for something, but they're all different. They all have different jobs. So low score could be an indication of low diversity. And we do give you a diversity score. So that's something to look at. If your overall score is low, go look at your diversity score. One way we increase diversity is increase the amount of different foods you eat. So like your plate of foods, yeah, like incorporate that a lot. Just try to feed all those different bacteria. And when you increase the diversity, you know, that will increase your score and increase your health. And we give recommended foods. So that will help increase your diversity as well. If you kind of just pick a bunch of different things, you know, with my kids, I have charts of different colors. Like try to mark off different colors every time you eat because all the bacteria love different colors. Akkermansia love polyphenols. Faecalibacterium love, you know, your garlic and your onions and your leeks. And so, and all those are tied to health. So, yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I love that you said that about garlic and onions because I eat so many of those. Someone was asking about our scores. So it's really interesting when you get your scores because you get an overall score and then you get the diversity score that you were talking about. And then you get like this other kind of like the balance of everything in there, like the balance of certain bacteria compared to others. And Nate and I scored equal. We both got 83% as our overall. And I got 95% for diversity. Yeah. And Nate got 93% for diversity. So we're pretty good with the diversity. But I noticed on mine, What?
I said you won. You got the higher diversity score.
95% diversity. Yeah, I won on that one. But he won on the ratio. I had like a 50-50 because I have to work on a bunch of different types, but he had a 70% on that score. So he was doing a little better in those areas, and we both got different foods suggested. So we've kind of been trying to add certain things to each other's food because we do eat very similar.
Yeah, so that's great. The area you mentioned, the bacteria level, that's kind of really influential bacteria that has a lot of research behind it. So we give healthy averages on that just to know if you're on the lower end or on the higher end. And probably your score was showing a little bit more deficient in some of those beneficial bacteria. And then that's tied to the food recommendations, right? Because we're going to see what you're deficient in. Look at the research that shows which foods can increase those bacteria and then recommend those foods. So that's how that works.
Excellent. Yeah, and I've started implementing those food recommendations. I'm so excited to see how things change over the next couple of months. How long actually does it normally take to start to see an increase in the bacteria? Like if you, for example, I'm adding sunchokes into my diet now and I eat them almost every single day. How long would you say is a good amount of time? Like, is it months or is it years or is it weeks to change some of the bacteria?
So to change the bacteria, I mean, it really depends. It works as an ecosystem, right? They all work together. It kind of depends on your pathogen load. It depends on how low it is. You know, if you're 0.02% Akkermansia and you're trying to get it to a healthy average between 1 and 3%, it could, you know, take 5 or 6 months of just mindful incorporation. But again, these are all good foods for you, right? And they're healthy foods and they contribute to health. So it's not that big a deal to incorporate them into the diet. But it really just does depend how the microbiome works together. When we're looking at symptoms, it depends on the symptoms too. Like when you change the diet and you incorporate probiotics, if you're dealing with constipation, low transit time, that can be adjusted within days sometimes for people. But if you're dealing with like brain fog and anxiety, more far-reaching systems where the gut has to act on the vagus nerve up to the brain, that can take more like 3 or 4 months to kind of see some real results or start to feel better.
Cool. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. I was like, you got to give it time, obviously, for
Yeah.
these little guys to start growing. And I always tell people to start slow with certain new foods, right? Because there was somebody asking in the chat about gas and bloating, because a lot of people who start incorporating a lot more raw and plant foods into their diet, they get a lot of gas and bloating. Can you expand a little bit on that? Like how they could help the transition over to more foods?
Yeah, and that's not bad. It may feel bad, but it's just those bacteria adjusting, right? So I completely agree with you. Start low and slow. Slowly start incorporating. Bloating is one of those areas where, you know, it's not necessarily an excess gas. We all create gas. It's the response to the gas. So when the bacteria break down foods and they create gas, it creates pressure in our gut. And then we have these epithelial cells that feel the pressure and they create a reflux. Normally we have no idea this is going on, right? The diaphragm goes up, the oblique muscles and muscles push in, and we just kind of push out the gas all day long without knowing it. So with functional bloaters, it's more like there's a communication issue, and they found that it's in the microbiome. It's a dysbiosis within the microbiome. But instead of this reflux, their diaphragm pushes down and their obliques go out. So I don't know if anybody's suffering from this, but if real functional bloating, it almost looks like, you know, you have a flat stomach in the morning and you just have this pouch by evening, which is horrible. And I feel for them. There's some diaphragm exercises you can do, modulating the microbiome, changing it, whether it's targeting with probiotics or prebiotics have shown effective. But also I would say, same to what you mentioned, maybe pull back a little bit and start slowly incorporating it. But the foods creating a gas is not a bad thing. That's kind of, you know, the bacteria are also creating metabolites that contribute to your health. Like they're getting butyrate, which is the energy source for your colonic cells and protecting you from colon cancer. Like they're creating all these great things. The gas is a byproduct. But you don't want to remove those food sources. You just want to maybe pull back and introduce slowly.
Yeah, especially if it's really painful. I love that you said that about how gas is normal, because there are a lot of people who feel like they should have zero gas. Like in order to have perfect digestion equals zero gas. But that would indicate, in my opinion, a weaker gut microbiome, correct?
Right, absolutely correct. Now, there's some instances, you know, some people have SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, where there's certain types of bacteria. One of them is called Methanobracter smithii, it's an archaea. And then there's another bacteria that create methane and hydrogen byproducts that can be really irritating to people. That's not really tested through a stool test. We can see the fallout bacteria, but that's tested through a breath test. So that's treated a little bit differently, but the just gas production completely normal. Like that's absolutely, most of us do not know we're doing it, but if you know, you could hook up contraptions to us, which they've done before, you would see that all day long people are creating gas and passing. It's completely normal.
Nice. Yes, completely normal, completely normal. I had somebody asking about so you have the top 5 top foods to eat, but you also suggest the top 5 to avoid. Now, when it says avoid, it doesn't mean that it's bad. I took it from the test was that to avoid those foods simply because those food feed bacteria that you already have a lot of and you don't necessarily need it. Is that a good observation?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And at times, so there's a phylum called Proteobacteria that at higher levels can increase inflammation in the body. And we know inflammation's the cause of most diseases, right? And so Proteobacteria is tied to a lot of animal fats, animal proteins, dairy. So sometimes that will be recommended to avoid because the Proteobacteria is on the higher level. Again, it's not a food plan, which is very important to understand because we all know, you know, it's important to get your carbohydrates and proteins and stuff. But it's more of a recommendation. If you can avoid those items without compromising, you know, protein or such, it's good because your levels are already on the higher end, or these type of foods affect beneficial bacteria that are deficient in a negative way. So we're trying to give you the best option to target those bacteria that are either deficient or overgrown.
Yeah, it was really interesting when we got our test back because Nate and I both had avoid pineapple and kiwi. And we were just assuming it was because we already had a lot of bacteria that those foods feed. And obviously not going to avoid completely pineapple because it's so amazing. But just like gonna lower it and then eat more of the top 5 foods instead.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how you should look at it. Yeah.
So yeah, the next question I had was, what is excessive gas and bloating caused by? We already discussed that. And again, I'm really happy that you talked about how important it is to have gas a little bit because it's normal. So the next question I have is, how are hormones linked to our gut health?
So this is a fascinating field that's really started to come about in the past 5 years. I think looking at the microbiome and looking at hormones. So estrogen metabolism and reabsorption is kind of monitored by the microbiome. So they're seeing that, you know, imbalances such as PCOS or endometriosis, breast cancer can all have an effect because of the microbiome. So they're looking at dietary interventions, which is, you know, part of that. Food is medicine. It totally is. So that's one area. Sex hormones. And then gut hormones, hunger hormones are regulated by our microbiome as well. So insulin sensitivity, fat storage, all of the CCK.
Oh no, I lost your volume.
Modulate the hormones, which is so cool.
Cool. You cut out a little bit there for a second, so I missed a little bit of it, but I'm sure everyone else got it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was just a little volume strange thing, but I can hear you now, so that's good. And then, so yeah, that's amazing. Isn't it amazing how interconnected we are, and our gut is so important. And I have people who tell me, like, they go on a really, really low fiber diet, right? Super low fiber, and they get all of these issues and not realizing that fiber is such an important thing to have in your diet, and that we shouldn't be extracting it and we shouldn't be taking it out. We need it to feed our good bacteria and to have that ecosystem. So important.
Right.
The next question I have is, what about exercise? How does exercise affect the microbiome?
Yeah, so that kind of feeds into epigenetics too. You know, we know exercise is good for us. There's some research articles looking at sedentary individuals and those that exercise 3 hours a week. And we see that the ones that exercise have higher beneficial bacteria, specifically those two I think I mentioned, which are my favorite, the Akkermansia and the Faecalibacterium parnitziae. It actually increases them just to exercise. And part of that may be the meditation part of exercise, right? That helps us, our mental state. But too much of a good thing can be bad too. So we see also those that train for long distance running, marathons and stuff, that stress can make the microbiome grow into a dysbiotic state. So we do recommend, you know, if you are training, it's great if you're doing long distance training and all that stuff, but even more important to monitor your microbiome and just make sure, because that stress can exert some negative effects on the microbiome.
Interesting, interesting. See, I'm learning stuff too. This is so great. Oh, I had a question about probiotics.
Good.
So I've heard that when you take probiotics, they really just help on the way down. They don't necessarily stick around, because a lot of people try to grow their microbiome by just taking probiotics, but they fail to realize that they need prebiotics to feed the bacteria. How do, like, if you take a pill for microbiome, how does that look when it goes through your system? Do any of them stick around, or do they just help on the way through?
Yeah, so that's a complete myth that they like reseed your gut microbiome, right? They're transient. They're not part of your residential bacteria. Usually 5 to 7 days they'll stick around. I've seen it in some studies up to 14 days, specifically with the vaginal microbiome, which is interesting. But that doesn't mean they're not addressing certain issues and helping the beneficial bacteria grow. They're really good at optimizing the biome, creating a good environment to get the beneficial bacteria grow. But they also, depending on if you have any pathogens, there's specific strains of probiotics that create antimicrobials that target those pathogens. And then also there's strains that address your symptoms. If you have bloating, if you have constipation, sleep issue, all the probiotics, the field of probiotics is crazy, just where it's going in science. But they really have fine-tuned it to specific strains can address specific symptoms. And that's where the strain's important. I will say, you know, just to tell everybody, when you're looking at probiotics, they're not all created equal. And sometimes I go to the grocery store and I see the wall of probiotics, and I can't imagine, without knowing anything about probiotics, what it's like to pick one. I would say always look for strains, because the strain determines what the bacteria does. I talk about E. coli. You know, most of us think that E. coli is pathogenic and creates bloody diarrhea, but there's a probiotic E. coli, and it's dependent on what those numbers are after E. coli. The pathogenic E. coli, I think, is 0157H7. But then there's the E. coli that's a Nissel 1917 that's been a probiotic for like 50 years. So that strain turns on or off genes to determine what that bacteria does. So it's really important to look at that. And then it's important to look at the clinical studies behind the probiotics. Bacteria can grow. So we can sell probiotics that can have bacteria in it, but you want to make sure that you target your specific imbalance.
Yeah, I was thinking too, I want to try doing food changes first, and then do another test and see how that changes, and then maybe do a round of the suggested probiotics and see how that changes. If someone is taking the probiotics recommended by OMBRE, how long, like say I wanted to do a test, would I stop taking the probiotics for about a week or so before doing another test, just so that they're not in the stool, or does it matter?
I would recommend stopping for like any probiotics somebody's on before they test. I would say stop like 5 to 7 days before.
Okay.
Same thing if you had to take a round of antibiotics. Wait 5 to 7 days before taking it again. That kind of gives the biome time to adjust. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm excited to go through my journey. I'm trying to increase my score slowly. You'll get there.
Yeah.
I had a question about Candida. So I would say, what is it, maybe 22 years ago now, I was diagnosed with Candida from my naturopathic doctor, and I went on countless cleanses and kits and diets and everything to try and get rid of my Candida. But it wasn't until I changed the foundation of my diet and what I was eating every day, like the high fiber, the variety, and all of that, that my Candida actually went away all on its own. I didn't have to kill it or do anything like that. But the test doesn't, your test doesn't test for Candida because it's a yeast. But is there something that you can see in the test that would signal that maybe somebody has issues with Candida? Or is it even a thing?
Um, yeah, no, it's definitely a thing. Sometimes we can see specific species. There's one Prevotella cocri that feeds off of metabolites from yeast fungus that when it's on the higher end, that could indicate someone may have an overgrowth. You know, and I completely agree with you. The problem with trying to cure Candida with drugs is because you can become resistant to antifungals. But foods work. Like they do. Coconut oil has shown almost, you know, more effective than some of the antifungals out there. So changing your diet and moving it to boost your microbiome, boosting up your beneficial bacteria. What you want is to crowd out any pathogens, the yeast, the fungus that can grow, right? And part of doing that is really nourishing those healthy bacteria.
Yeah, because I did so many kits. It was like crazy how many herbals and everything that I took for so long, but I never changed the foundation of what I was eating. And it was just a constant battle until I changed. But on that note, how do antibiotics affect a gut microbiome? Because my husband went on, he had a tooth pulled, and that has been bothering him since he was a kid, like a long time ago. So he had that tooth pulled, and they had him on antibiotics. And then he did the gut test, and he still got 83%. So I'm wondering, how does it affect? Because some people think it's like a nuclear bomb and it destroys everything when you take an antibiotic. But how does it really affect the gut microbiome?
Yeah. Yeah, there are different levels of antibiotics, right? It definitely affects the microbiome. I will say first and foremost, like antibiotics are probably the best invention to medicine because someone could die from a paper cut. Like we need them. But are they overprescribed? Sure. Like since modern medicine antibiotics, since we've, you know, built them out and used them more often, we've seen autoimmune diseases just skyrocket. And part of that is because we think we're modulating the biome a lot. So things happen and you need to be on an antibiotic. That's even more of a reason why to really concentrate on your gut health before, right? And after. If you don't, say you don't concentrate on it before, if you take an antibiotic, I would really push like those prebiotic foods. Think about a probiotic. Think about testing. It's important to see how it addresses it because when a bacteria goes extinct, such as we'll say Akkermansia, which is highly tied to metabolic health and gut lining integrity. I mean, so much. Once it's extinct, we can't, a probiotic is not going to bring it back. The only thing that could possibly bring it back are fecal microbial transplants. And the research is still early on that. And so we just want to try it. We have to eat every day, right? Yeah. So why not nourish that microbiome to help protect it when we do have to take antibiotics?
Yeah. So how would a person have a beneficial bacteria strain go extinct? Like what kind of extreme would have to happen in order for that to go extinct?
Yeah, so broad spectrum antibiotics can do it. If you have a few, take those, you know, a couple months in a row, 3 months in a row, that definitely can do it. They, of course, they do research on animals and they see this happen. And then, you know, there's presentation of disease when they go through multiple situations of antibiotic exposure. And then they may kind of unravel some of those genes, maybe get MS or other different autoimmune disease. So it's not super easy for it to go extinct, but things happen in life that could cause it to go extinct for sure. Antibiotics, I would say 1 round of antibiotics is not going to make the bacteria go extinct, unless, you know, maybe your levels are at 0.002. And all it takes is, you know, 1 broad spectrum antibiotics for a few months to knock it out.
Yeah. Oh, that's that's sad to hear, because you don't want that to happen. So how does a low fiber, like for example, say somebody was eating only like 5 grams of fiber a day, would that cause certain bacteria to go extinct? Because I know the average North American is eating only like 5 to 10.
I don't know. Yeah, and recommended is closer to 25, 35, right? It's completely normal based on our standard diet to get very low levels of fiber. I don't know that I could pinpoint it could go extinct. It could definitely bring them all extremely low. I mean, we just really need to look, how are the beneficial bacteria fed? They're fed through these different fibers. They're the ones that have the enzymes to break it up and to create these amazing metabolites that contribute to our health. And so when we remove their food source, I mean, there's cause and effect, right? So the effect is like they're not nourished anymore. So then, of course, they're going to deplete down. That's the problem with, you know, some people go on a really low fiber diet because they may have bloating or other imbalances. But the problem is they could be starving and their beneficial bacteria, and the long-term effects could be detrimental.
Yeah, I've seen that a lot too, especially when people move over to, say, a diet kind of like mine, where they aren't eating enough for one. That's like the #1 issue that people have, or they're not eating enough variety, or they want to do something like an extended water fast. How do you feel about water fasting, how it affects the gut microbiome? Because if someone's going for, say, 20 plus days water fasting, how would that affect the gut microbiome?
I'm not sure how much research I've read on that. I do know intermittent fasting has shown to boost certain beneficial bacteria, such as Akkermansia. I'm not as familiar with long-term fasting. I haven't seen the research on how detrimental it could be. Intermittent fasting is beneficial, but you know, that's somewhat time restrictive, right? Maybe just not eating at nighttime, or maybe giving, you know, 3 hours between every meal. But as far as long-term fasting, my hunch would be it would not be fantastic for encouraging the growth of the bacteria, but I would have to go back to the research on that.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about variety. It's all about abundance. It's all about the fiber. What other myths do you think people have about the gut microbiome that you might want to dispel? Like, is there anything that we didn't cover?
I think, you know, some people think that you can't shift your microbiome at all. You know, we get our microbiome partly how we're born, you know, C-section or vaginal, breastfed or not, you know, antibiotic exposure, how we eat, you know, because someone is raised a certain way because of life circumstances, it doesn't mean that they're going to have a terrible microbiome. They really can work on shifting it. It may take mindfulness every day, right? When I see your plates, I mean, it is a food romance to me, but because I love color, but I'm also looking at all the different foods you have there. And I'm like, oh, look at those red foods. She's feeding Akkermansia, or those she's feeding Faecalibacterium. And when you start learning this, then it's easy to eat that way. Because when you see the research behind the microbiome is tied to everything when it comes to health and disease, then you want to encourage it. You want to encourage the growth. So again, you're not bound by how you were raised. You can change that now. You can make the mindful decision every day to choose the foods, feeding health or feeding disease. I mean, every time you put your food, you know, your fork to your mouth. And so the only other thing I would say is with probiotics, when you look at probiotics, they're not all created equal. And I like to tell people, you know, if you have a headache, you wouldn't blindly go into the medicine cabinet and just pull out a medicine. Because I mean, say you pull out an antihistamine, that may help your headache, maybe 10% of the chance if it was because of allergies. But most likely you want the most direct path. The same is true with probiotics. You really want to look at the probiotics, look at the strains, and make a mindful decision, because no one likes to waste money. And we can't buy health, but we can encourage it by what we put in our mouth every single day.
Oh, that's awesome. So one last question, and then we can open it up. If anyone has any questions, you can share in the chat right now. But I was wondering, so how often would you recommend, say, someone like myself or my husband or even anyone watching, how often should we do a gut test like OMBRE Lab?
I say twice a year or 3 times a year. Some people do it every month because they like to see the trends, right? They like to see that affirmation that there's change. But to really see changes in the microbiome for, most of us, 3 to 4 months, maybe 5 months, retest and see how it's changing, how the bacteria is responding to the foods you're eating or the probiotics would be my recommendation. And then make sure it's not a time in your life. Like, you don't want to test right in the middle of traveling or you lost your job. Stress, anxiety, suppressed immune, that can all have an effect on your results.
Yeah, that's a good point. Totally good point. Because especially when I went through like really heavy times of stress, like when I went through like some really intense breakups in my past, I wasn't really eating a lot either. So that's going to affect the microbiome plus all the stress and all of that. So yeah, that's a good recommendation. Someone's asking any recommendations on probiotics and prebiotics, maybe kind of what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. So I'll start with prebiotics. Prebiotics selectively nourish the beneficial bacteria. I remember like 10 years ago when I got into the field, a professor said, well, prebiotics feed bacteria. And I was like, well, wait, we don't want to feed the bad bacteria. And he was like, no, that's the definition of a prebiotic. It selectively feeds the beneficial bacteria. Probiotics optimize the environment. They create antimicrobials that target any pathogens. And then they also can directly target symptoms if you're having them, if it's the right strain of probiotics. So they're definitely different. Your prebiotics are, going to be in your leeks and artichoke and bananas, chicory, all those awesome foods that I see in your pictures. All of those are great prebiotics that are going to boost those beneficial bacteria.
Nice. So for prebiotics or probiotics, would you recommend taking both? Like not just with food, but you know how there's some supplements that have prebiotic in it, like chicory, for example. Would you recommend taking both? Perfect.
Yeah, so I take both, but because I think probiotics, help with immunity as well. So I take both. I continually stay on a prebiotic supplement, and I continually give my kids a prebiotic supplement just for that extra boost of specific foods, right? Maybe they don't get enough fiber in their diet that day, but I still want to keep on concentrating on boosting those bacteria. So yeah, it's completely fine to take both. I would say if you deal with bloating, be careful, with your FOS or your GOS type prebiotics. Same as you mentioned with the certain vegetables and such, like start slow and low and build up tolerance. If you, take a dose and then you get bloating, pull back. Don't think it's not working. Same with your foods, right? You just want to go slow. But definitely both of them are fine to take together.
Nice, nice. I wanted to also touch a little bit more on garlic because in the community that I'm in, a lot of people feel like garlic is toxic or poisonous, which I don't agree with. But a lot of people also think that garlic kills your good bacteria. But you were talking about how prebiotics are selective in what they feed. So could you expand a little bit more on garlic and onions?
Yeah, so garlic and onions have been proven within the research to increase Faecalibacterium pronitzi, which makes them a prebiotic. And that bacteria specifically is our major butyrate producer, which is anti-inflammatory and contributes to our health. But garlic also has over 200 chemical properties, and one of them is they're great at addressing pathogens. They're antimicrobial. And just because they target pathogens and they're antimicrobial does not mean they kill off the beneficial bacteria too. They actually nourish some of our beneficial bacteria.
Nice. Good, because I love garlic. I'm not going to ever stop eating garlic. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So we have a question here.
Yeah.
How do colonics and enemas affect the microbiome?
Was that probiotic enemas or?
They just
Sorry,
asked.
can you repeat that?
She says, how do colonics and enemas affect the microbiome?
Oh. They definitely can have an effect. I would probably say before testing, wait a couple of weeks after having one if you've had one. I don't know how drastic an effect they can have, but they definitely can affect them. So wait before you test.
Okay, cool. And then how do we know what brand to buy prebiotic and probiotic? And then someone else is, asking the same question. What about what brands, kind of that kind of thing?
Yeah,
I say take the test.
First and foremost, I always say, yes, take the test, because we are actually going to take a lot of guesswork out. We're actually using your symptoms and your analysis to recommend a probiotic. And these are really strong, clinically effective probiotics that have a ton of research behind them. But I would say if you have a probiotic at home, first look on the back. If they don't list the strains, that goes back to the E. coli thing, right? It's not that it's going to be pathogens, but maybe it's not helping at all. You need the strains on there. And then you also need to look at the research. If they give you the strains, look to see if there's any clinical studies behind them. If there's not, then I don't know how much I would trust, that probiotic. We list out our clinical studies that we have on strains within our probiotics, because it's not just trusting us, right? We're putting it back on the research. That's how we validate probiotics. That's how we validate anything in the world of medicine. You have to go back to the research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're saying there's so many options, and that's why I was saying definitely get the microbiome test, because OMBRE Lab, they give you like this in-depth kind of like even like which strains you're low in, and they give you suggestions for which of their probiotics work best with your specific gut microbiome, because we're all different. We're like snowflakes or fingerprints, like our gut microbiomes are completely different. So we need to take the test. It's very important. And
absolutely. We are completely different. There's new.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, there's new research showing that they can look at your bacteria on, your laptop, and they can determine that it's yours based on the microbiome more so than your fingerprint, which is crazy. Or your dog. They can link your dog to you based on bacteria, which is like, it's kind of going like that. It's a snowflake. Like it's so cool. Such an awesome field, and it's only going to expand more. So it's important to invest the time to start looking at your microbiome now.
Exactly. So the last question we have here is, so where do you take the test? I have in the chat OMBRE Lab. That's the test that Nate and I did, and the test that we're going to continue to do through the months and years to test our microbiome. You can go to their website and you can use code ROMANCE. It's supposed to work to get your 10% discount off there. But yeah, definitely go to their website. You basically order a kit. They deliver it to your house. You follow the instructions. You take a sample. It's very, very, very easy. And then you just drop the kit in the mail. And only for the US right now. But if you're in Canada or the UK, you can search for other microbiome tests. But that's how you do it. You just get the test done. And then after a couple weeks, they email you the results.
Yeah, yes, and in those results, we'll tell you, give you all the tools to optimize the biome. If you're deficient in areas, we'll give you the recommended foods based on your microbiome, and then we'll give you a suggested probiotic based on your analysis and symptoms you may be experiencing.
Mm-hmm. So just as what we were saying, I love that it's like as unique, like they can tell that it's your dog. That is mind blowing. So incredible. But yeah, everyone is so
Yeah.
different. So you can't just blanket probiotics and say, here, take this or take that, because it's not going to work with everyone. When I was working at the natural health store way back in the day, like 20 years ago, we were told by some of the probiotic companies, they're like, get your customers to try different brands, because at that time they had no idea. Because sometimes somebody would take one bottle of something and then they would get great results, and another person wouldn't get any results from it, and they'd be like disappointed, they want a refund. So it really depends. People's guts are so incredibly different, and even if you eat the same diet, like Nate and I, we have very different bacteria profiles, so it's very cool.
Yeah. Yes.
Sweet. So we're at the 1 hour mark. I just wanted to thank you so very much, Kimberly, for joining us. I hope you had a great time. This was so informational, and truly appreciate you coming onto my channel to share your knowledge.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm just as inspired by you. I love what you're pushing out to the world, and you're inspiring a lot of people, and we can't buy health. So nurturing it with foods and tracking it and monitoring it is the best way we can prevent or try to prevent any health imbalances.
Agreed. Agreed. All right. Thank you so much. We're going to end it here. You are awesome. Keep doing amazing work. And for everybody else who wants to grab that, it's OMBRE LAB. I will share it in the description, and there'll be links and all that kind of stuff, so you can go check it out. But thank you again. Mwah. Have yourself a wonderful
weekend.
All right. Bye.
Yes.